BBC Radio Scotland. Now, if you love your photography, in particular street photography, then this next item might just be for you. A new exhibition featuring the work of acclaimed street photographer, the late Robert Blomfield, has opened in Edinburgh. Described as Edinburgh's quiet answer to Glasgow's Oscar Mazzaroli, Robert Blomfield spent his time as a medical student in Edinburgh, honing his photography skills during the 50s and 60s. And here to tell us more about the exhibition, Robert Blomfield, student of light, and the man himself are Daryl Green, curator and head of special collections at Edinburgh University, and Robert's son, Ed. Welcome both.
Cheers.
Hello
there. Hi there.
Hi, got you both. Ed, let's start with you. For those listeners unfamiliar with your father's work, can you give us a little bit more about his background and, in particular, his passion for photography?
Yeah, well, he grew up in Sheffield, and his father gave him his first camera as a teenager. And from that moment on, he was just hooked. He started developing his own films at home, and then really developed his skills at university when he went up to Edinburgh to study medicine.
So I was just going to say, so here he was combining his work as a student, but also his passion as a photographer. Was there ever a possibility he might have gone in a different direction?
There was. For a short time, he considered using photography as a career, but I think really his calling was for medicine and for caring for people, and photography was really his passion. He didn't want to be asked to shoot anything in particular. He wanted to be completely free. It was quite pure in that sense.
Daryl, the exhibition is entitled Student of Light, and we heard Ed saying it was a passion, and this has led to quite a collection, which you now have of his work. How did it come to the university?
It's been the work that we've been doing with the family. So we have been speaking with the family for the past 2 years or so. Once we found out about the collection, and especially because Robert's story is so much embedded with his student experience and his life at the university, we felt it would be appropriate to offer a home for his collection if the family were looking for one. So, it's been a kind of collaboration with the family over the last couple of years to make sure that they were comfortable with the collection coming into the university and making sure that we could do something with it as well.
Ed, what's that process been like?
It's been great. I mean, to be honest, this is the culmination of many years of us banging on doors and trying to get recognition, really, for work that, firstly, our mother, who passed away 10 years ago, that she recognised as being worthy of being more widely seen, because he was a doctor, and the pictures that he took outside of friends and family, no one really saw them. But we wanted to find a home for them where they'd be appreciated, and this is where we are now with a hopefully permanent home in the university.
And this is quite a treasure trove, Daryl, that we have of these photographs. What's the focus of the work that's on display?
Yeah, so the work that's on display is really focused on his life as a student. So there was a show back in 2018 at the City Arts Centre, which was his street photography in pure, where the focus of our show at the university is really looking at Robert and how his time at the university and his time in the city really honed his craft and his artwork. So you'll see shots in the student union, at parties, in the middle of rectorial battles, in the middle of Old College, but then also some of the more familiar street photography as well. But you're right, it's absolute treasure trove.
So it does take us out of the university environment. There will be a lot of Edinburgh that is no longer here, but there's a lot that is still here.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of shots that are kind of timeless as well. There's shots on the streets, two ladies in front of a pharmacy down at the bottom of the mile that could have been taken yesterday, So his photographs, especially the stuff that's on the street, is both timeless and of its time as well.
What was it like, Ed, growing up surrounded by these photographs? Were these photographs stored, kept away? Was it part of the sort of family environment that you would look at them? Were you aware of just how vast the collection was?
I was aware, yeah. Every cupboard in the family home was pretty much stuffed with boxes of prints, boxes of slides. And we used to have slideshows from a young age. That's one of my earliest memories. And I just knew that there was just thousands of them. It was part of our lives, really, these pictures. But like I say, outside of the family, most people didn't get to see them. Particularly these old black and white shots, were sort of stored away in the original boxes that the photo paper came in. and no one really saw them.
And his passion as a photographer also extends to his father. Was his father a keen photographer as well?
That's right, he was, and that's it was my granddad that gave him his first camera, as I said before, and they used to take pictures around Sheffield. He was a member of the gliding club. He was passionate about aviation. They'd go to Farnborough and shoot the air shows, and really there's a lot of historical interest throughout the archive. He was at all sorts of events over the years, and when he switched to colour in the 70s, he was even at the very first Glastonbury in 1970.
Wow! That's really interesting archive. I'm just thinking this could have a real, this could move anywhere and be taken anywhere with the amount of photographs that you have here. And Daryl, you think back to the 50s and 60s, and obviously in Edinburgh, a city like Edinburgh, which has been well photographed, it's been well filmed. There's people have done this professionally and as amateurs over the years, particularly in the 50s and 60s when photography was really booming. But what was it about Robert's work? Because he didn't have any formal training, as we found out. He came up here as a student, but what was it about his work that's just made him stand out?
I think there's two things with Robert's work. One is he was unafraid to get close to people. So his street photography, he's up in people's faces, he's getting emotional reactions, and he's capturing what life is on the street. And we have lots of photographs of Edinburgh, but we don't have those kind of photographs of Edinburgh from the 50s and 60s in the same way that, Mart's Rowley in Glasgow in the same time period you do. But his ability to capture the kind of mood and the light in the city is something that there's something almost ethereal about some of his photos. He's got shots over the Cowgate, and the shadows and light coming in at the same time. That can only be Edinburgh, and that can only be Edinburgh in a certain time. And is right place, right time, right photographer.
What was it about your dad, Ed, that you think he was so fascinated about street photography in particular? I mean, I think Edinburgh is a fantastic city if that's your passion as a photographer. But what was it about that kind of photography that really attracted him?
I think the thread running through his whole life really was an interest in people. I think that's why he wanted to be a doctor, and that's what shines through in all of these pictures. Really, he was really interested in connecting with other people, even strangers on the street, and he was very good at getting a laugh out of them. Newspaper sellers, people in nurses in the hospital. If you look through the collection, it's really largely about people. I think that's the theme here.
And these photographs were taken. How long was a period of time that he spent in Edinburgh?
He went to the university, I think, in 1956, and took 8 years to complete the course, and then stayed on when he was training to be a junior doctor. So we're talking about 1956 to the late 60s.
And afterwards, he felt a great deal of affection for Old Reekie, didn't he?
He did. We had a film at the first exhibition that he had was at the City Arts Centre in 2018, and a film was made for that by a local filmmaker called Stu Edwards, which you can see on his website. And he's made a sequel for this show. But in the first one, there's quite a bit of there's a good interview with my dad in that, and he really is fond of Edinburgh, or was fond of Edinburgh until his last days. It's a special city.
Really. Daryl, how does Robert compare to other celebrated street photographers of that time?
I mean, as we start to go through his archive, it's really clear that he's one of the best photographers of his time period working in the UK. His unflinching ability to get close to people and take really fantastic and dynamic photographs, but also his ability to move around the city and capture the mood of the city. There's hardly anybody that's like him. He's emerging as one of the best street photographers of the 20th century.
And what kind of insight do we get to student life in the 50s and 60s?
Oh man, it's fantastic. There's all kinds of behind the scenes stuff in places where you wouldn't expect a camera to be taken as well. That time period Edinburgh is very buoyant. It's very vibrant. There's a lot of things going on. The city's changing, but also culture is changing and attitudes are changing. So there's dances of the student union. There's rowing and sports and running races. But then there's also students out in the city protesting, debating, involved in charity parades, all kinds of stuff.
Ed, just listening to Daryl there, getting access, and obviously that was part of his day-to-day environment and work, if you like, when he was a student himself. But he was also quite subtle with regards to how he took his camera and used his camera, wasn't he?
He was. I think by the time certainly by the time he had finished uni, maybe even when he arrived, he'd become so familiar with his kit. You know, he didn't change lenses too many times. It was all done by instinct, really. He knew. I mean, I can remember even a few years ago asking him an exposure down in London, and he just knew off by heart what the right settings would be on the camera, and it was showing on my modern digital thing exactly what he'd said, you know, the f-stop and so on. He didn't need to fiddle around. He worked pretty quickly and efficiently, and that allowed him, I think, to just focus on composing the shot he wanted and connecting with the person.
I love
in
to.
the picture.
I mean, we've got a couple of his cameras on display in the exhibition, and he taped over and blacked out all the chrome on his camera too, which is kind of a street photographer of the 60s things to do. So there's very much kind of blending into the backgrounds that he loved to be part of.
Daryl, I believe curating this collection was a collaborative process between yourself, Ed, and his brothers. So, I mean, and I'm just listening to Ed there, you know, growing up, thousands of photographs everywhere. That must have been quite a difficult and, you know, time-consuming project to undertake.
Yeah, I mean, we've been working together for the past year and a half now, working through the collection, but really we're kind of tip of the iceberg with the collection. Everything that's on show and display is from his enlargements, so the prints that he made from his negatives. And the real meat of the collection is the negatives. So his negatives that he processed himself, developed himself, have remained rolled up and untouched for 60 years or so. And that's the next big step in this project, is to get into the negatives, conserve them, digitize them, and actually see what his process in the camera was all about.
So this is effectively perhaps just the beginning of, you know, there's much more to be done.
There's much more to be done, and it really, for us, the next step is really to see what that process for him was like. You know, we see what his prints were. He was making his own prints, but to see what he was doing in the camera is really exciting.
Very quickly, I'm just going to ask you both, do you have a favourite print that's there for us to see, Daryl?
I hear all the time. I think right now mine. This is the first time his color work has been exhibited, and we've got a brand new, kind of never before seen photograph of two ladies and a kid down a wind. We're not quite sure where in Edinburgh, where the kind of light is cutting through, and there's smoke and haze. The composition is fantastic for me. That's my favorite photo currently.
Ed?
At this show, I would say there's a shot of the university steeplechase from about 1958, and the crowd of runners is just charging towards him. He must have stepped out into the road. And I just like to imagine what happened moments later when they all just surrounded him. It's a pretty dramatic picture.
And finally, Ed, just before we let you go, what do you think your dad would have made of this? And your mum, because it was obviously very important to her.
I'd like to think they'd both be thrilled. I know that my dad was pleased with the idea of depositing the pictures at the university. We managed to speak to him about this before he passed away. And yeah, for my mum, I think she'd be thrilled. She also studied at Edinburgh. She did history of art. And as I said before, she was really enthusiastic. She championed the work for years. And I feel like hopefully we've done a good job of finding the right home for them.
Well, that sounds fascinating. The fact that this is, as you say, just the tip of the iceberg makes it even more interesting. Daryl Green, Ed Blomfield, thanks so much for joining me today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The exhibition, Robert Blomfield, Student of Light, is going to run from the 6th of May to the 1st of October, so plenty time to catch it at the University of Edinburgh Main Library. You're listening to The Afternoon Show on BBC Radio Scotland, myself, Grant Stott. It's just